I'm joined in our Washington studio by Ryan Bourne, the Chair in Public Understanding of Economics at the CATO Institute. Ryan, welcome to our program.
Good to be here.
So Johnson was elected by party members, obviously, not by the public. How was his victory, if you will, playing out in the streets of London?
Well, I think there's a mixed reaction. Boris Johnson is what we describe in the UK as a Marmite politician after a foodstuff, which means you either really love him or you really hate him. And that seems to be the polarised positions that we're seeing right now. The Brexiteers, because he led the Leave campaign in the referendum, trust him perhaps more than any other frontline mainstream Conservative politician to try and get Brexit over the line. He said he's going to try and do that, do or die, by October the 31st. And of course, in reaction to that, lots of people who voted Remain in the referendum are very, very down on this decision to elect Boris Johnson. And, you know, trying to portray him actually as a bit of a nationalist, even though just a few years ago, magazines like The Economist talked about Generation Boris, people who were not only economically conservative, but very socially liberal. So I don't recognise some of the characterisations of what he's like, and this being like a nationalist, xenophobic leader. But there are big divisions in the country as to whether Boris will make a good PM or not.
Well, you mentioned he's someone who is either loved or hated. Well, we have a leader in this country, President Trump, who is a rather polarizing figure, described as unpredictable. But you actually wrote an article for the Washington Post saying, not so fast, these two leaders are not exactly the same type of people.
Well, they both have a propensity to offend people. They both speak their minds, and they both speak to the public over the head of other politicians. They can reach directly into parts of the population that perhaps other politicians can't. But I don't think we should take this comparison too far. When it comes to policy and when it comes to disposition and like worldview, Trump and Boris are very different. Boris is by and large global looking, global focus. He's very pro-free trade. He's very pro-immigration.
You described him as an optimist.
Yeah, well, during the referendum campaign, he even pitched as an idea an amnesty for illegal immigrants, you know, something that Donald Trump would never propose. But yeah, I think he generally has an optimistic worldview. He sees, he likes how Britain is right now. He thinks it can be even better with some of those repatriated controls from Brussels. Whereas compare that to when Donald Trump was elected, he was talking about the country being a disaster, being ill-led by stupid leaders. Boris isn't like that. He's very different in the way he talks about the country.
He may not be that way, but he's also made a series of diplomatic gaffes and controversial comments, Ryan. Are we going to see a different tune, perhaps, as Prime Minister Boris Johnson takes over 10 Downing Street?
Maybe to a certain extent. You've got to remember, for years he was a newspaper columnist, and you know what sells...
Wasn't he fired from his job?
He was fired from one job as a journalist, but he was a very successful newspaper comment piece writer. And as a result of that, you know, he's writing to sell newspapers, and so some things that you say will be controversial. I think he'll take the role of Prime Minister extraordinarily seriously. He appears to be putting together behind the scenes quite a serious team, experienced team to take over. But look, he can't lose all of that personality in office, because that's the reason he's got to where he has. And I think the Conservatives are betting that that's the sort of thing, and that personality can win them a general election against Jeremy Corbyn, who all Conservatives think is the biggest threat to UK prosperity.
What about some challenging foreign policy issues on the table? Iran, for example, and we've got these issues with these tankers. The Iranian tanker being held in Gibraltar by the British. You've got the British tanker being held by the Iranians in the Strait of Hormuz. Is he going to be more in line, perhaps, with the Trump administration in terms of when it comes to foreign policy issues like Iran?
I think this is a very open question, because obviously geopolitically, with the UK leaving the European Union, there's a desire from some within the Conservative Party to really strengthen that alliance with the US. But if you actually look at Boris Johnson's record on the Iran issue in particular, Boris Johnson wrote a newspaper article suggesting that Iran should perhaps be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, and that would actually improve relations. He was also very pro the Iran deal that President Obama signed.
Well, everybody is, except the United States. For the most part.
Remains, I think, on issues like Iran, it remains to be seen what position Boris will take. I think his instincts are very inclusive of third countries, and he wants to bring as many countries as possible into the global trading and diplomatic system as possible. But you know, with Brexit occurring, it may well be for geopolitical reasons that he decides to take the country in a direction of being a closer ally to the US.
Well, we will see, and I know you will be watching. Ryan Bourne, thank you so much.